pregnant with my son, I was like most parents and pretty excited, wondering about who he's going to be. Is he going to be a bookworm? Is he going to love sports? Whatever he wanted to do, I was there to guide that, support it, and encourage his passions. You think about the time you're going to spend together as a family, vacations you're going to take, vacations you didn't get as a young kid. All those things go through your mind as you're preparing for your new baby. Wondering what life is going to be. Going from a family of 3 to a family of 4. I already had a daughter, and so I had some experience with a baby before I was pregnant with my son. At around 40 weeks, I still did not go into labor. The doctor said that the baby was too big and that if I didn't get induced soon, then I may not be able to give birth, and I might have to give birth by C-section. And so that was heavy on my mind. In my appointments, they kept saying the baby is measuring really big. I felt very heavy. Towards the end, I was miserable. I could barely bend over. I couldn't sleep. And I told the doctor, no, I want to go into labor naturally. 40 weeks and 3 days, my doctor was like, you're still not getting contractions. I think it's best if we induce you. So I agreed. I went in, and within 7 hours, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy weighing 9 pounds, 6 ounces. He latched right away, which was completely different than my daughter. I had a very long experience trying to get my daughter to latch, ended up pumping, bottle feeding, working with a lactation consultant. Anyways, his breastfeeding journey was a lot smoother. I would say he was a fairly normal baby. He slept, he ate, he slept a lot, just like my daughter did, nothing out of the ordinary. The hardest part about him is he would not sleep by himself in a bassinet. My daughter, I would get to sleep, place her in her bassinet. She did a normal newborn routine up every 2 or 3 hours. He would not sleep in a bassinet. He had to sleep next to me. I remember nights fighting this for 3 hours, trying to get him to sleep in the bassinet, and he would not do it. So anything you read online, it's fairly normal for newborns to be fussy, for newborns to have to be next to their moms, and I just thought maybe he just needs a lot more attention than my daughter did. We eventually got him to sleep in his bassinet after a few weeks. As time went on, he was very fussy all day. It wasn't like a colic, but it was very fussy. Didn't matter if I did certain things, he was just really fussy. And again, you read online, that's normal for babies to be fussy. I just thought, well, he's just much more fussy than my daughter was. There was a couple of times after trying everything that I was advised that I had to put him in his bassinet and walk away. This happened a few times to calm myself, to take some deep breaths, to tell myself I'm not a bad mother, he's just fussy, maybe there's something going on that I can't see. As more time went on, the fussiness continued, but it would only be from about 4 to 8 or 4 to 7 when he'd go to bed. But it was all evening. And even my husband's like, maybe he's just a really fussy baby. And I remember saying, I think there's something going on. This isn't normal. I just felt like there was something going on. At around 4 months, when he was actually now on the play mat, he was starting to roll. Very early at rolling, he would get little bruises on the back of his head, like little tiny round bruises. So I thought, well, maybe the play mat is just too hard. So I got a thicker play mat. And I also noticed from us holding him, he would get bruises. And I thought that was really strange because we weren't holding him any differently than we held our daughter, and she never got bruises like that. So our 4-month appointment comes around, and I tell the pediatrician, hey, he's getting bruises on his body. He looks at them, those look normal. Boys are a little bit rougher on themselves, blah, blah, blah. And I think, okay, so maybe everything is going fine. Maybe I'm just overreacting. As more time goes on and he starts crawling and being more active, he is getting bruises. So around December, we had decided to get pictures done of my daughter and my son. And we had placed him on the floor. He could sit up. and he kind of fell to the side. Nothing extreme. He didn't cry. He was still a happy baby. We get home, we go to undress him, and he has this massive bruise. And we both think it's very odd because there was a sled on the side of him that he fell onto, like to the side, but it was literally right next to him, an inch away. So we're like, how could that create such a big bruise? Very odd. The next day, the bruise was massive and protruding. And I thought, this is not normal. And so at that time, we had tried to make an appointment at the doctor's office, but they had said, well, since you have to bring in your daughter, why don't we just schedule to where you bring both of them in? He's not in pain, he's not crying. So, kids fall, sometimes they get bruises. Okay. So we're waiting until the next appointment, and I honestly don't know what happened, but one day he has a huge chest bruise on the other side. And I told my husband, this is not normal and there's something going on and we need to get him in. We cannot just keep waiting. So we get my son in for his 8-month appointment, finally get in. We show him the bruise, and from experience in working in the mental health field, I was a school teacher, and during that time I also was going for my graduate degree in trauma-focused counseling. I had finished my clinical hours, and that's when I found out I was pregnant with my son, and we decided at the time it probably was best if I just stayed home. So I knew from working in the mental health field that I would be questioned for bruising, and the pediatrician did ask if I was abusing my son. And even though I knew it was coming, it was a hard question to hear because I can never imagine abusing my baby. Just, he's a baby. So as I explained, no, I would never imagine bruising my baby. That is why we were here, because of the bruising. We had mentioned it at his 4-month appointment. I had called another time about another bruise, and you told me that it was just normal. Well, once he saw the bruising, he even said, this bruise is not normal. And I understand it was very hard. He had bruises all over his body. And the pediatrician asked, how is he getting these bruises? There was nothing specific that my son was doing. Like he would fall or he would, hit his chin when he's trying to stand up. But for the bruises to be intense as they were, I didn't have answers. My daughter, who is 2, in the summer, she has fallen off the sidewalk, even when holding my hand. She has fallen face first at the park. She'll get like a bruise on her eye. It's gone within a day or 2. So I understand, looking at my son's bruising, they were extreme. Like it wasn't normal. It wasn't like a kid falling. It looked pretty bad. So they're like, you know what? We're going to run blood work and we'll let you know. So they run blood work. I'm waiting around. I'm reading online, right? You, as a parent, you're going online, bruising symptoms. And when blood disorder comes up a lot. My son didn't have all the symptoms of a blood disorder. He didn't ever have any bleeding in his mouth. He didn't have bloody nose. He didn't have bloody noses. So one time my husband had clipped his nails and clipped a piece of his finger, and he bled, but it was nothing extreme. Like we put pressure on it, it stopped, and we moved on. And within a few days it started to scab over and it was fine. So again, there was nothing very extreme that we had seen other than the bruising. Now I will say I am thankful that I have a supportive family and a husband, because if a child was bruising as badly as he was, there could have been questions, there could have been concern, but obviously my husband and my family knows me. I would never do anything like that. So I am thankful on that. And during all of this stuff going on, when I was looking on social media, you just see story after story of women who bring their children in because of bruising or broken bones, and they get taken away. And it turns, eventually once they fight in court and they get more testing, it turns out they have like a rare disorder. And at that time, the child hasn't been treated effectively. And so I remember crying and telling my husband, what if there's something going on with him and he gets taken away and it ends up getting worse and we have to go to court, right? And so as a mom, you just feel very overwhelmed with all this information because you still don't have answers. And when people are like, where'd he get that bruise, on his head or on his chest? That's really bad. And you're like, he literally fell to the side And thankfully my husband was also there when we did our Christmas photos. My husband had changed in before the photo and he saw the bruise after, so we were all together. So eventually I get blood work back and the doctor lets us know that he is anemic. So we're thinking maybe he's just anemic, right? That's what's going on. So he advised us to have him take iron. Well, more time goes on because they had done multiple different tests, and he calls me and says, his PTT levels are very escalated, and I don't know what that means. So you need to take him to a specialist. So that was hard to hear, but we're like, okay, at least we're getting somewhere. And we started giving him the iron. Now, this was at 8 months. My son is now 10 months. Even now with the iron, he barely bruises. And he is a very rambunctious little boy. He is curious. He wants to crawl on everything. He wants to grab everything. We joke, like every day this kid is trying a new way to hurt himself. Very different than my daughter. So he barely bruises. We went to the specialist and we talked to her. And even she asked us about blood disorders in family. No history that we know of, and they do blood tests. And a week later she calls us and lets us know that he has Hemophilia B, and his clotting factor, which is factor 9, is at 1%, so that is very low. So there was just a lot of questions and a lot of processing. So after she had told us that, she did say take some time and, just take some time to process. So the next day, I literally cried off and on all day and all night. It was a blur to me. So individuals with bleeding disorders can get bleeding in their joints, and that's why you have to treat them. We had not known up to this point, so now I felt guilty as a mom. What if he had bleeding in his joints? What if he has arthritis because of it now? And then also, when somebody hears their child has a bleeding disorder, it can be a lot. There's a lot of information. It can be a lot. So the next day we meet with the specialist over Zoom, and she explains we're going to have to inject him in the veins 3 times a week, or we can put him under surgery and get a port in his chest. It was a lot. It's a lot to take in. So I honestly didn't know what to say. I kind of just sat there, and she said, I can see that you feel a little overwhelmed. My husband ended up taking over and just said, you know what, we need some time. This is a lot. There was some other stuff mentioned on the call, such as, well, how come giving him his iron, he doesn't bruise anymore? What's going on with that? How come he has no other symptoms of bleeding disorder, other than bruising? So a lot of those couldn't be answered. And then she goes on to say, when he starts being sexually active, you're going to have a conversation with us. And it's like, he's just a baby. Like, I understand that those are things we need to discuss later on, but like literally you're telling me we have to inject him 3 times a week in the vein, and we have to be careful he could bleed out, and now we have to put a port in his chest, and we need to talk to him about being 16 and active sexually, and it was just a lot. It was a lot. So we got off the phone, and I ended up joining a hemophilia group on Facebook, and I kind of just posted my concerns. I ended up talking to some amazing moms on there. They had also mentioned that 3 times a week of injections is a lot. Usually how they do it, as I'm explained, I'm still very new to this journey. We haven't even seen the child specialist yet. But usually they'll do a factor injection, and then you will wait 2 to 3 hours to see if the child's body accepts it. And then they have a prolonged one that you don't have to do every 2 days. And then you come back in a week and they check his blood levels and see how long it takes for his body to metabolize the factor. Other parents do say it's best to do it 2 to 3 times a week, just so that you can prevent any bleeding in the joints, and that way when he's older he can just do it on demand, or we can do it less. So still a lot of questions, right? So sometimes when you find answers, you have more questions because of those answers. So even me doing research online, looking at iron and hemophilia, you can see that iron helps with hemophilia. So that's probably why he's not bruising, but does not mean he's not having joint bleeding. At one time, I went to go stay at my dad's. I put him in the crib. My dad doesn't have a camera in the bedroom. I hear my baby crying. I go in there. He seems fine. I'm like, maybe he just is upset, new environment. I rock him back to sleep. He takes a nap. He wakes up from his nap and he can't walk on his foot. Now that I know he has hemophilia, that could have caused joint bleeding, but we didn't know. And so now I feel guilty about that. So there's a lot to it. When I had talked to mothers in the Facebook group for hemophilia, they had mentioned it's best to speak to someone who is a child hemophilia specialist who has been treating children, because how they're actually going to treat children is different. And when I was talking on the phone to our first specialist, they had both said, we haven't had a child in so long. So we want a second opinion. When you are given a diagnosis of something that's going to affect your child for the rest of their life, I think getting multiple opinions and insights is the best thing we can do. And in my opinion, if this specialist did specialize in hemophilia, wouldn't she have known that the iron would help with the bruising? So like I said, even me researching, so there was just a lot of things, and that's okay. Sometimes doctors don't know, and sometimes there's always new information, so it doesn't hurt for us to go get a second opinion. So I just feel very concerned. We now have to be very careful. We had put mats all over our wood floor for him. We're going to block off certain areas of the house. We're going to put foam padding everywhere. And it kind of sucks to have to wait another month, because now he's coming up on a year old, and I don't want him to have any internal bleeds. So we still have a lot of choices to make at this point. Do we start treatment with another doctor in the meantime and wait? Do we just a lot of questions. Even now, reading up on it, a lot of doctors aren't specialists in hemophilia. So when you take him to the emergency room, and let's say my son has hurt himself, they could bleed out and die inside. They could bleed inside and die. So you have to say, we don't have 2 hours to wait. My son hit his head. It's not like a normal situation. He can bleed and die. When my son goes to a friend's house, that he has to be aware, the family has to be aware that my son has hemophilia. Because again, if he trips, if he hits his head, he could bleed internally and die. Or he could hurt himself, have bleeding in his joints, and be in a wheelchair or be in crutches. So these are all really serious things. Obviously, this is all new to me, so I'm still trying to start my journey of figuring everything out. I prioritize my mental health, and I prioritize how I feel. So the first day after hearing, I accepted that I needed that time to grieve. My heart was broken. If you've ever had a broken heart from a breakup, that's what it feels like. It feels like a broken heart. So my heart broke for him. I understand that this is going to be his new normal, but for me, it's still hard. It's okay sometimes to be sad, and it's okay sometimes to be confused, and it's okay sometimes to not know how our outcome is going to be. But all we can do is be flexible and adjust. 30% of individuals who get hemophilia never had any family history. And even within that 30%, it is still rare for individuals to only have 1% factor IX, which is what my son has. So not only does he have a rare disease, but he even has a rare form of that disease. I also want to point out that from my reading, it has nothing to do with pregnancy. I had a very healthy pregnancy. Even in the books I read, that there's nothing you can do to necessarily prevent it that they have seen from research. There is a new gene therapy that I saw was FDA approved for adults. It is $3.5 million. So obviously right now that's not an option. As much as I wish I was a billionaire or a millionaire, I am not. I'm just a normal person, staying home with my children, so that way I can be more cautious. So what does that mean for my life? So I was planning on I have just my internships to get my master's in trauma-focused counseling. We were planning maybe when my son was no longer nursing to talk to family about helping with care, or maybe even daycare, because my internship is only part-time. But now with my son having a blood disorder, my husband and I both agree that daycare probably is not an option, because again, you have to watch him. So if he hits his head and they don't see it, or he hits his arm, he's not going to always display symptoms, and he could end up bleeding internally. Now, I understand, obviously, there are parents who send their children to daycare with hemophilia, and if you are one, please share your stories and your experiences of how you were able to navigate that. So now me going back to work is put on hold for a little bit until we can figure out how sure we feel about that, because he needs to have factor 2 to 3 times a week, and I don't think the daycare is going to be able to inject him with it. It'll probably be a nurse. And so there's just a lot of unknowns there. As far as even vacations, when we go on vacation, we have to have paperwork with us to show he has hemophilia. And now we're going to have to call the hospital ahead of time to make sure they have factor. That's what we call it. Factor is what you inject them with. And if they don't have factor, can we bring our own on the plane? So again, just lots of questions. This is just my journey. If you stuck around, thank you so much for watching my video. I had originally intended to have my channel focus on my trauma healing, how I decided to become a trauma-focused counselor, but I also want to show that this is life, and through life, we're going to have ups and downs, and we're going to have things that happen that we didn't plan for. And how do we take care of our mental health during these times? If you want to be a part of my journey of healing, if you still want to be a part of a journey of focusing on mental health and healing from trauma, then please join my YouTube support family. And I do look forward to sharing more with you. If you have any feedback or advice, I'd love to hear it. I think that supporting one another can have huge benefits for mental health. And I will see you in my next video, and hopefully I have some more updates.